Yeah, welcome to the second dMSA event of this academic year. I think some people might still be joining, but it's 5:05, so I think we will start with this event already, and then as people come in, they can jump in the middle if you so want. My name is Aline Sierp. I'm hosting or chairing this event, and I'm very happy to see that there's so many of you here. There's already 65 people who've joined. We had 250 people who have actually signed up, so this is a huge success. And this is particularly good because this is a bit of a different event compared to some others where your active participation is actually crucial. And I will explain in a second why that is. When I was asked by Routledge to think about writing a new textbook on memory studies, I thought, okay, what do we need to write such a textbook? And my first thought was really we need as much input and feedback from the field to be able to write something useful, because of course a successful book is only successful if it is also useful, useful for students, useful for teachers. It should be, of course, used in the classroom, and I think that works only if as many people can give input as possible. And therefore, I organized a panel at the last MSA conference in Lima, and then I decided to also organize this webinar, giving you the possibility to provide feedback and input, really. To give a quick overview of what we're going to do in the next hour and a half, I will quickly introduce the two speakers. Astrid Erl and Ye-Hyun Lim kindly agreed to start us off, also with their experiences of writing textbooks. I will introduce, of course, then the project itself. And then we will very quickly open the floor to have your feedback, your reactions, your ideas, etc. That ideally all flow into this final product that I hope will hit the markets in a few years. A few housekeeping rules. Your microphones will be muted as long as we are presenting, we are talking, so as long as the round table is going on. Also, your cameras should be off until then. But as soon as I open the floor, you can turn on your camera, so that will be enabled, and you can turn off your microphones, because then I think it is much nicer, of course, if we actually see whom we are talking to. You can obviously raise your hand if you want to speak. You can use the raise your hand function, but you can also ask questions in the Q&A chat box. And I will try to pick them up as fast as we can. It could sometimes be that I jump over something because if there's lots of people speaking, it will maybe not always be easy to respond to everything. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce the two speakers. So this is Astrid Erl. Welcome. Very happy to have you here. Astrid is a professor of Anglophone literature and cultures at the Goethe University in Frankfurt. I could say a lot about her and her biography, but I only picked up a few pieces of information that I think are relevant for us today. So she's the general editor of the book series Studies in Collective Memory, which was started in 2024, so it's a really recent series. Then she also is the editor of Media and Cultural Memory, which is quite a bit older. So this is by the Goethe and since 2004. Then she is also the co-editor of a companion to cultural memory studies, which was published in 2010. Mediation, Remediation, and the Dynamics of Cultural Memory, published in 2009. And Memory in Culture, which was published by Prograph in 2011. This is basically an introduction to memory studies, which was originally published in German as Kollektives Gedächtnis und Erinnerungskulturen in 2005. And 2017 already saw the third edition, so it says something about the success of this book, and it has been translated into Chinese, Spanish, Polish, and Japanese. And I think she will speak mainly about the experiences with writing this book, if I understood her correctly. Then the second speaker is Ye-Hyun Lim, and I apologize if I keep on mispronouncing your name. We've been working together for quite some time and I still don't know how to pronounce your name properly. I'm sorry about this. He's a distinguished professor and founder of the Critical Global Studies Institute at the Sogang University in Seoul. And he has served as the series editor of Mass Dictatorship in the 20th Century and of Entangled Memories in the Global South, published with Palgrave, and of Global East, published with the Central European University Press. His most recent books include Victimhood, Nationalism, History and Memory in a Global Age, which was published or will be published by Columbia University Press in 2025. And then Opfernationalismus, Erinnerung und Herrschaft in der postkolonialen Welt, which was published in 2024. And Global East, Remembering, Imagining, Practicing, also published by Columbia University Press in 2022. And I think, if I did not misunderstand, it's mainly this last book that you're going to refer to also in your talk. To quickly give you an overview of the project itself before we then actually go into the actual round table, I will start sharing my screen so that you can follow on the PowerPoint what I'm talking about. Okay, I hope you can see this. So basically the background of this really is that Routledge approached me saying that they're starting a new series which is dealing with the contemporary and contemporary history. And when I talked to the editor, they really meant contemporary. So they only look at developments after the year 2000. And they said that one of the important developments since the year 2000 is with this incredible rise of memory studies. So they thought a new textbook that is dealing with memory studies and is dealing particularly with current thinking and debate, with changes that have happened really since the year 2000, with everything basically that the field has been, the transformation the field has been undergoing in the last 25 years should be subject of this new textbook. And they really want to have some sort of a new introduction to the field. So not something that is looking at everything from Halbwachs onwards, if you so want, but really just the very recent developments, surveying a little bit the field, new topics that are emerging, etc. And while it's placed in the series in contemporary history, you can imagine that, of course, memory studies is not a history subject, if you so want. So I think that the placement in the series is a bit random. But I thought it was quite remarkable that they thought at Routledge that memory studies was one of the defining elements of developments after the year 2000. So before starting, the first thing I did, of course, was to look at existing books, what is actually already there. And this is a really small selection that I'm going to present now. There's lots of things missing. I'm pretty sure that also in the audience, there's maybe some of you have written a book that could be defined a textbook. Then you're like, why is my book not there? But of course, I made just a very cursory overview, a small selection of, I think, the books that would qualify as textbooks, because most of them are actually not called textbooks, as you can imagine. And one of them is the Routledge International Handbook of Memory Studies, which is an edited volume. Then we have Research Methods for Memory Studies, which is really focusing particularly on methods. Then we have Astrid Earle's a companion to cultural memory studies that's also used a lot in courses as a sort of textbook. Then we have Cultural Memory Studies and Introduction, which is one of the few monographs. Most of these books that I looked at are actually edited volumes. So that is one of the things that they also want to have differently, if you so want. Then you have the Collective Memory Reader. You're probably familiar with this massive book that came out a couple of years ago. And then Critical Memory Studies. So these are only 6 examples, really, which I picked out of quite a long list of books that could be defined textbooks. As I said before, many of them are actually not called textbooks, but they're used as textbooks if you so want in your teaching. I'd also be curious to hear from you maybe what you're using, because I'm pretty sure the list, the inventory I made is probably not complete. So what did Routledge want, or what do they want? I mentioned before, they don't want to have an edited book. They want to have a single authored book, a monograph, if you so want, a rather short one. So only 200, 250 pages. It should really clearly pitched at the student audience. And it should, and I already mentioned that, look at new currents, at current debates, at new developments, and it should also include worldwide developments. Most of the writing, and we know that, is very Eurocentric, and there's lots of things happening, of course, in other parts of the world, which are not translated into English and therefore are remaining also a little bit under the radar. I thought, instead of just saying like, oh, let's brainstorm about different possibilities, I thought I'll come with 3 concrete options as a proposal, and then I let our 2 guest speakers discuss them a little bit. Then it's also for you as the audience a little bit easier maybe to come up with ideas that are related to this, and we're not just discussing in thin air. And one of the options could be to really focus on emerging major topics. To just give a few examples, the topics that came to my mind and that came out also from the panel I organized at the MSA conference in Lima were digitalization, activism, populism, reception, memory politics, decolonization, memory in the environment, and queer memory, just to give a few examples. The second option could be to organize this book around controversial debates that have also, been important in the field and that are often also not solved. So remembering versus forgetting, for example, history versus memory. You're all aware, I think, of those debates. And the third option could be to look at concepts and deconstruct them. To look at especially the discussions about them, to look at them from different angles. So these are the 3 ideas that I had. I think, and again, I would like to hear feedback, is that each chapter should connect different disciplines. Memory studies is a multidisciplinary field. Many of us are sometimes overwhelmed as well, I think, because we all come from a specific discipline or maybe 2 disciplines and are not necessarily aware of other disciplinary viewpoints. So I think one of the big challenges of the book would be to connect them, to at least mention them, which is connected to the second point, which is the issue of examples. I think a lot of the more theoretical debates become more tangible if you actually work with examples, and those examples ideally should come from different fields. And I mean not only disciplinary fields, but also different geographical areas. Now, this is a textbook. So one of the questions I had, besides, of course, like how to structure it and what to put in, if you so want, is really what else should go in there? So should it have a section with further discussion, potential assignments, intended learning outcomes, or something like that? So really geared towards teachers and students. Should it have a section on questions that can be discussed in the classroom? Is that necessary? Is that useful? Or is it really rather something that teachers actually don't use? And should it have a methodology part? I think it's one of the big challenges a little bit that we are working with very different methodologies, often coming from our own disciplinary background. And there's no such thing as like a memory studies methodology so far. So these were the things I'm not sure about, if they should be included or not. And I would also like to hear your feedback on this. Now, the first ones who are allowed to give feedback are, of course, our 2 speakers. And I'd be very curious to hear A, what you think about this, and then B, of course, what were your own experiences in writing textbooks? What were the challenges? How did you tackle them? And what are the elements that we really have to think about if we embark on this new adventure of writing a textbook? Shall we start with Astrid in the order of appearance on the poster?
Very good. Thank you so much, dear Aline. It's great to be here and to have this dMSA while we're all waiting for the Prague conference to get together again. So thanks for bringing us together. How long can I, or do you want me to speak for this input?
So it's 20 past. We have until 6:30. I would like to give as much space as possible to the audience. Would 10 minutes be enough?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, yeah, thank you. I think this was already quite an impressive overview. And what does textbook mean? That was the first thing that I asked myself. And I think for me, for my understanding, a handbook is not a textbook. That means our field already has many wonderful handbooks, and you showed some of them. And I would also like to add, for example, Redstone's and Bill Schwartz's Memory Histories Series Debates, which was organized also according to certain debates, because that was one of your ideas. And then perhaps as a fun fact, the textbook industry in the German market started with a lexicon, an encyclopedia, basically from memory from A to Z. And I think we recently have with Palgrave something like a living encyclopedia of memory research. So I think we're very good on this, and I can say from what I hear that the steady flow of handbooks will not stop so soon, because there is the Brill handbook series. Then, of course, there is the new series with Bloomsbury. And my general sense is that all presses want to have a memory study series, which is great news for us, I would say. And then, of course, we have the collective memory reader. So we have a collection of the most important original contributions to the field. And we have Emily Keatley's and Michael Pickering's research methods for memory studies. So that's already a huge pile of important stuff. What you want to do, and this is also a challenge, is a single authored book, no? And that is one of the key challenges. What can one person do? No? Because we have interests everywhere in our interdisciplinary and international field, but we are basically writing from somewhere, and we are trained in one or two disciplines. Now, how to do this? So in terms of single authored books, there is something that you didn't mention, but I think that we all should keep in mind. Cubitt's History and Memory, very important, more from an historian's point of view, but also very fundamental. And there is already the Routledge New Critical Idiom and Whitehead's book. Oh, where's the camera? And it's blurry, but you see what I mean. So there are some textbooks around. Although I would see them even, and also my book, I would see more as an introduction to a field rather than a textbook proper. So perhaps what you will deliver will be, in a sense, the first of its kind. And before I come back to your suggestions and say what I would like to add, or what are my ideas about that, quickly, my personal history with writing an introduction to memory studies is that, first of all, I never meant to write an introduction to memory studies. What I did is I wrote a dissertation, and after that, one of the professors said, your theory part is a book in itself. And then I was basically encouraged to redo the theory part and publish it as an introduction to memory studies. And as a single author, I, of course, had exactly these challenges. I could cover very well literary studies approaches to memory, and I had developed in a team a particular media studies approach to memory. But the other stuff is basically kind of research within different disciplines. So I tried to give a disciplinary overview, to give that's how I started, an historical overview, and I think that's indeed in a sense done. And I also know that Jeffrey Olick works on the intellectual history of memory studies, so more stuff will come up, probably not needed now for this textbook. Yeah, And that was my way of trying 20 years ago, of trying to bring in what is out there in terms of different disciplines. And over time, it became clear that it's a highly international field. So how to do that, how to bring in the different regional approaches to memory, so that the whole thing gets more and more difficult. And as you said, in German, I have 3 editions, but I've stopped now. The last edition is 2017, and I realized that the whole thing is going to explode if I go on adding. 2011, I added the transcultural turn and transnational memory and new approaches to media. 2017, new approaches to digital media, forgetting a new chapter, future thinking a new chapter. But how would you go on? And let me quickly turn to your suggestion, which I find really good. And I think I am an option 1 person here. I think it would be good to organize the volume around important, I'm not sure it's topics, it's probably fields of subfields of inquiry. And yes, the digitalization is extremely important, also with the recent work on platformization and AI. Reception, before I mention what else I would add, let me say that I endorse what you have already said. You can't do it all. You come from one discipline and you come from one region. So how to bring in the other stuff? And I think, and you can't cover it all. It's too much out there. It's too much. So I would do that in a case-based way, and I would give examples. So I would describe a certain subfield and its major challenges and contributions, and then I would give an example of research. And I've looked at my introductions to media studies and to film studies, and I realized these books are really good at doing this, these textbooks, at giving a general theory and then taking 2 pages to zoom in into one discussion of a film, for example. And I think in that case-based discussion, that's a super elegant way to bring in a certain region and a certain regional memory constellation, but also a certain disciplinary take and a certain method. Because also in terms of method, I would not know how you could do it all, but you can draw on people. One example, if you have a chapter on future thinking, you could draw on what psychologists say about the remembering imagining system and give just one example of a study they conduct. Or if you have a chapter on forgetting, I don't think that remembering and forgetting is a controversy. I think it's 2 parts of a process. But I think you should have a chapter on forgetting. And that would be an opportunity either to bring in as a case, let's say, Guy Biner's work on forgetting in Ireland, and show in 2 pages how does an historian of Ireland does it. Or you bring in work on retrieval-induced forgetting from psychologists. Put them in, sum them up in 2 pages, quote some, and then give people a sense of how you could work with psychological methods on that. Yeah, I have my own additions to your list of topics that we can go into later. Let me just say that I think what is really lacking right now is national and transnational memory, because that's still on the agenda. From there works multi-directional and transcultural memory. From there works also the renationalization of memory, also in terms of populism. So I think that's an important cover concept. And I think we cannot go around the question of genocide and comparative genocide studies, and thus bring in the important work that has been done on the Holocaust, but also different works on colonial genocides. And I wonder whether you shouldn't have a section on museums and material culture, because that's also an important field in memory studies, and much important work has been done there. And I think that won't stop for the next decades to come. And that may be my personal predilection, but I think I would want to see a section on memory and generation, because intergenerational transmission, post-memory, epigenetics, and family memory could be subsumed under such a header. Yeah, and I think that's it for the first round. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Astrid. That's already really helpful, especially the idea of how to structure this and how to deal with the challenges of having to write something alone, covering so much. I really didn't know how to go around this, but I was already thinking like I have to draw on. It's like a textbook is very much that, right? Directing people to where to look further. I think that's how I understand textbooks.
Absolutely, and including other texts also. I think that's absolutely fine there as examples, no? Mm.
Yeah. It's great idea. Shall we move to Ye-Yoon Lim and see what your take is on that?
I really enjoyed the listening to you speakers before me. Perhaps I may add some points which was not mentioned before. First of all, for me, writing a textbook is like writing a canon, right? But in my understanding, memory studies just appeared on the scene as an as a stance against the history as the canon. So, in a sense, it could be a sort of self-contradictory work to write a textbook of memory studies, because memory studies actually decanonize the history as a canon. But so, in that sense, writing a textbook of memory studies is not desirable but necessary. So, how to make this a not desirable thing to make or not, necessary to the next generation of memory studies scholars, right? So how to write a non-canonical canon might be a key to the success of this writing a textbook of memory study. This is might be a starting point for us to tackle the writing memory textbook of memory studies. And the second point is that actually Henri Rousseau once, just in my private conversation, he talked of his Institut Histoire Tang Prezang, right? So many people translate Tang Prezang, Histoire Tang Prezang into contemporary history. But actually, when Henri Rousseau just coined that term, Histoire Tang Prezang means history of present time. Actually, what he had in mind was memory. Memory is remembering is actually the action that is happening now, right? About the past. So actually, he says always Anglophone the guys mistranslated his institute into contemporary history, but actually, history of Tang Prezang means actually remembrance of these memory things, what he had in mind. I mean, in that sense, all these the items of memories that you will deal with in your textbook is actually very much contemporanean or contemporaneousness, something like that. So this is the about the past, but actually our action of remembering past is very much contemporary one. This can be also another starting point when you write a textbook of memory studies for the students who are graduate students. So these two things can be sort of very a backgroundish a starting point for writing the textbook of memory studies. It's a non-canonical canon, writing a non-canon, how to write a non-canonical canon. And the second one is actually so how to write about the past as a contemporary things, especially from the viewpoint of memory studies. And then based on this premise, I think I want just to emphasize two aspects. One is the phenomenology of memory, right? There is no absolute correct memory. So, I mean, on whose standpoint and whose voice and, for example, it's depending from one country to other country, depending from one social group to other social group, even within one country, depending from one continent to other continent. So many stances, and then multivocality of the memories comes from that sort of a phenomenology of memory. So I think that the really important thing in writing a textbook memory studies in your case is how to really collect really representative multivocal memories from the different groups of regions. So I think that, talking about methodologies in the abstract terms, yes, it's important, but I think that one of the more persuasive way of indicating what the memory studies is to the students is perhaps to represent all the different multivocal memories. So I think that picking up the very, very interesting examples, which are not necessarily contradictory, but also reconcilable, different, reconcilable, but sometimes looks like same, but irreconcilable, those memories, things, and then examples. I think in this case, examples are very important under all these items that you suggest in the option 1. And the other one is actually, for example, I'm thinking of now in historiography, history of animal. History of animal is quite a new rising field. Then it reminds me of that in the memory studies, we used to presume that only human beings are agents of memories, but also finally can think of for example, animals. They can have their own memories of their own life, their surroundings. So what about the thinking of animals or non-human subjects as the agent of memories? Now, in the Poland case, in the Eva Domanska and her group recently suggested a environmental memory of genocide. I mean, it means that instead of making or building up new monuments or memory sites, they just want to leave the memory of their genocide to the greens or trees or some non-human agents which was surrounding actually the site of genocide. Still, I'm not very much persuaded by this sort of approach, while I think this is very, very interesting approach. So in your case, the memory and environment, yes, our memory of the climate change, of the environment can be interesting thing, but we can little bit push this question of memory environment to the question, to the point that can we think these animals or non-human agents can be actually a subjects of the memories? This kind be one thing. And also, I want to suggest as the final chapter of your book, sort of anticipatory memory means that a dialogue between a past and present, but beyond this, dialogue between past and future. Right? It's also related already cultural memory studies things, but our anticipated memory maybe as a concluding chapter of your textbook, you can talk about the students, right? It's a memory study goal, ultimate goal of memory studies may lie in the certain part, what kind of future we really want to get. And also how does our memory of the past be related to our imagination of the desire of future, something like that. Also, through the prism of the anticipated memory, I think you can approach to the dialogue between past and future as a sort of concluding chapter of your textbook. Just a very short suggestions to your project. I will stop here.
Can I quickly comment?
Yes, please.
Thank you so much, Ji-hyun. Very quickly, I think your first point is so important. What is the function of such a book? No? Do you want to place a canon on somebody's table saying, that's it, read it, then you know? And I think with memory studies, it's not doable, basically. But I think it's not a canon, but it's a tool. I think that's the function. So what we want to give students is a toolbox where they find tools with which they can tackle their own concerns, because memory is such an emergent phenomenon. and the topics are so emergent. If we write it now, students who read it in 5 years will have very different concerns. And I think this has worked very well so far. I think memory studies has provided a toolbox, which in the 90s was important for national memory and for Holocaust memory, but which can be carried on in order to study things that we couldn't anticipate even 10 years ago. Remembrance of lost species, queer post-memory, memory of animals, and so on. So I think the function is a toolbox. And about the future, I fully agree with you. I think it's more than an outlook. It's an entire chapter. And to make clear from the beginning, memory is a system that includes remembering and imagination, anticipation of the future. Only if we see it in these 3 temporalities, then we deal with memory. And in that chapter, you could do remembering, imagining system, future thinking, utopian thinking, hope, and all these things, I think, somehow belong to your anticipatory memory. Now I'm quiet.
Yeah, this is great. I also like the term anticipatory memory in this context. I think that is a great term. And indeed, I fully agree with Astrid about the canonization. That's certainly something we don't want, and it's also impossible. I think it's simply impossible. So I think from the beginning, the textbook has to make clear that this is a selection. This is not complete. This is only giving examples, and hopefully it indeed directs students and teacher maybe to further work. And I think one of the things that I really would like is to direct them particularly to work that is maybe not so well known, right? Because it has been published in other parts of the world. Maybe it is less accessible, etc. So that would be a little bit my aim, to decentralize to a certain extent also the field a little bit, and diversify it further. Is there anything else you'd like to add at this point before we open up the floor to the audience to see what they think?
Yeah, just
Yes.
one thing that I forgot to mention is, in general, it is also inevitable but not desirable, but actually mnemonic Eurocentrism, in a sense, dominates in the memory studies. But I think that it is, in a sense, very natural, because the memory studies, especially on Holocaust, has been accumulated really excellent works we got to have. And even though when I'm working on the memory of a certain political genocide in East Asia, I'm always referring the Holocaust memory studies, because methodologically and the certain angles, and I can learn a lot. But also, on the one hand, we should recognize really well-developed stage of status of these European memory studies with a focus on Holocaust. But also, on the other hand, while we're referring or recognizing the importance of these Holocaust studies, also on the other hand, how to escape, or how not to fall into the trap of Eurocentric, mnemonic Eurocentrism in the making of those textbooks. Also, when you are picking up the multivocality of the memories, so I think you need to really, keep in mind how to really keep a distance to the mnemonic Eurocentrism, which is to some degree inevitable, but also we need to overcome these things. Yes.
Yes, another big challenge, I think. And I know, I forgot when I introduced myself that many of you probably know me as a co-founder of the Memory Studies Association. And this was from the beginning our goal, right? To bring in the different memory fields around the world and have conferences not only in Europe, but also elsewhere. And this turned out to be much more of a challenge than we thought. And I think also when it comes to textbook, this will probably be one of the big challenges that are necessary, though, to face. At this point, I would like to open up the floor, because, as I said from the beginning, some of you joined late, so you didn't hear that. But I would really like to hear from the audience, reactions, ideas, feedback, input, really. I cannot guarantee that I can hear everybody, because we really only have 45 minutes left. but I will do my best to hear as many of you as possible. And I already see the first 3 hands going up, so I will start taking them. Katarzyna, I think you're going to unmute people.
Yeah, everybody has the cameras and micros able now, so enjoy.
Wonderful. Okay, then I just go, because Teams is very useful. I see it's better than Zoom in that respect. I can see who raised the hand first, and Rigney was the first one on the list.
Okay, thanks very much. And Alina, what a wonderful project. It's so terrific that somebody is doing this. And so my response is from somebody who's been trying to teach cultural memory studies for years and always struggled with the lack of a textbook, even though there was Astrid's wonderful memory and culture and there was so many other handbooks, there was a fundamental problem. And speaking from that problem, I'm not sure I agree with Ji-hoon and with Astrid on the way forward. I think we're wonderful at deconstructing things and at making nuances and making it more complex and opening up more and more possibilities. But from my experience, students also, as in terms of a textbook, also need some anchor points. And we call it a canon if we don't agree with it, but let's call it a core concepts. I think there's some need for some element of core concept that there is a field. It's not just all in motion, there is a field. And there are some classics in the field and some points of references. And of course, there are discussions. But I think you need to, the choice for a textbook is also a choice not to be developing the field further, but trying to see how you're transferring the achievements of the field so far to a new generation. And in that regard, what strikes me as being really crucial is the notion of having key concepts, not to immediately deconstruct them, but perhaps to reflect on their genealogy and a very limited number of them. And in terms of methodology, one of the things that is so exciting about memory studies is that we have all these different disciplines, but it'd be wonderful to see a sort of problem-based learning, and I know in Maastricht that is a key term, that you have a problem or an issue and then you try to solve it from the different perspectives. At least some demonstration of the points of convergence between the disciplines, if only then to show that they achieve different things and do so in different ways. But I'm always, my experience has been the students end up with lots of different concepts, lots of different possibilities, lots of different themes, but don't see the field. So I think you have to be even perhaps more rigid in making selections in order to give that core understanding of what is at issue, and then perhaps in the final section work into new thematic areas where you can see these core concepts and core methodologies being worked out. So this is from my experience of teaching, that's what I feel the students would really need, and from which then they can move on to criticize, deconstruct, and do all of this. And one of the guiding concepts could be indeed this futurity of memory as an overall issue to show the relevance of memory to the present day for all the reasons that have been set out. But I would suggest really not being afraid of being canonical without being uncritical. And so I could say much more, but I leave it at that because there's many more people, I'm sure, who have lots of things to say. Thank you and good luck.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And yeah, it's actually good to also hear different voices and also disagreement, because then I think I will have to make a choice at some point of time how to construct that. But I don't think you're in complete disagreement, right? I think one does not necessarily exclude the other. And my experience with teaching memory studies has been a little bit like yours, that students are often lost in the different possibilities. But then I think a textbook can help to guide them through. The difference maybe is, like, do we talk about old debates, or do we focus on the new things that have happened since the year 2000? And that's, I think, where maybe we can combine these two approaches. But I'd like to hear the next speaker here. Okay, Astrid already pushes up on the list of the third person. Now, I don't know how to pronounce your name. Bana, is that correct?
Yeah, this is Bhavna Vijayarora. It's V sound, Bhavna. And I'm from India. And congratulations, first of all, for coming up with such a brilliant idea. I do agree this is the need of the hour. And if you ask me from India, in different universities in India, there's this major lacking in terms of curriculum designing as far as the field of cultural memory studies is concerned. In fact, it is not at all the part of the curriculum per se, and we generally introduce it in our classroom discussions through literary texts and whatnot, and try and bring about that inquisitiveness to our students. But they are inquisitive, but there's this whole lack of structural way by which we could put forth or introduce the field cultural memory studies. Though I can, I have some claim to this area of study because I myself have brought out an edited volume. Thanks to Astrid Errol and Carol Gluck, I've read all your essays, all your books, and this is what Unearthing Past and Present and Future. This is the edited one, not about the book per se, but that's how I try to introduce this complexity around cultural memory studies to my students, which is quite a bleak situation at the moment. This was very quick. I do agree to what Astrid Errol and Professor Rigne has just mentioned. But I definitely feel that as far as the textbooks are concerned, it need to be well structured in terms of which area, so that students, from the point of view of students, they get to see how things are clearly demarcated and put through under different nomenclatures of, say, media base or maybe mnemonic base, as Hin Liu Lim has mentioned. So I do have a couple of more suggestions and of course inputs for the same. One is, of course, I feel, from an Indian context, it could be memory in political discourses. Using memory in election engineering is one. And I do feel that healing and despair and the discourses of cultural memory studies that they generate into is equally important, considering the whole world maybe might be facing the kind of trauma that people are facing these days of all kind due to wars and political engineering and the right wings and so forth. Other than that, Hee Yoon Lim was mentioning about mnemonic Eurocentrism, and it occurred to me, why can't it be the Oriental mnemonic or the mnemotechnics that can be taken into account, the mnemonic aspect of from the East, from the Oriental side of reading. So these were a couple of suggestions. And yes, I do believe and congratulate you for this, for the same, because we all are eager that the more textbook come to the market, the better institutionally we'll be able to establish such memory studies departments in future. But currently in India, I can say that the situation is not very bright. A couple of great, premier institutions. Other than that, it's not a very bright situation. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot also for the idea of looking at Eurocentrism and then Orientalism, if you so want, as like sort of counterpoint. Yeah. We have Geoff.
Yeah. Hello. Hi. Thanks very much. I'm in the sort of position of agreeing with almost everything that's being said, even when people are seeming to disagree with each other slightly. And I'm full of envy of you for being the person who's going to write this book, although not so envious if you've got to try and sort of squeeze it into this contemporary envelope. But I think my feelings are kind of thinking firstly about the kind of textbook we don't want, which I think we're all starting by thinking that. So I think not only do we not want something that is canonizing, setting up a canon, but I think we also don't want something that's sort of freezing the present moment, either as the moment to which everything's seen as leading, or as the moment at which the key issues are sort of determined for all time. So I agree very much with the idea that what we want is a textbook that helps students to explore, that gives them some tools with which to explore, but that helps them to explore new ways of bringing those tools together. I mean, the other thing I think I would add, and this comes out of some of my own experience of teaching, I think, is that to me, it's not just a sort of textbook for memory studies as a sort of tribe of people who identify themselves as doing memory studies that we need. I teach quite a lot of courses that are contemporary history, maybe that may be what they call themselves, or they may call themselves courses in stuff to do with memory. But I also teach quite a lot of groups of students who think that what they're doing is public history or heritage studies or something like that. And they are aware that the boundaries between all these things are fluid and there are intersections. But what they need is good, shortish, well-written, exciting books that will help them to see the sorts of things that people are doing just over some slightly arbitrary fence from where they are. So, I'd like us to bear that kind of wider audience in mind. Now, where that leads you in terms of how to actually write the book and how to structure it, I'm slightly less clear. I mean, I think I agree with Anne that although it's great having lots of really interesting studies that deconstruct our concepts and our uses of those concepts, that may be not where you start in a textbook. I can imagine a lot of students becoming pretty confused quite quickly if they first encountered concepts in a sort of already partially deconstructed form in that way. So I would go along with Anne in wanting to perhaps think more in terms of where those concepts have come from, how they've developed. But that, I think, is where the issue about where the limits of the contemporary come in. So that's going to be for you to negotiate, I think, with your publisher. On the whole, I think I like what Astrid was saying about perhaps the idea of major, perhaps not topics, but fields being perhaps the most promising organizing place to start with, providing the assumption is that part of what's looked at is how those fields have come into existence and how they might actually go out of existence possibly. So it's not that there are fixed demarcated areas to which memory studies tools can be applied, but that people in the natural development of the discipline or of a sort of multidisciplinary activity, people define fields in different ways and evolving ways. And if we can help students to understand that, so we can use our own definitions of fields as they are now, but also bring them into question, I think that would be my feeling of possibly the best way to go about this. I got a few ideas of particular kind of topics that you could add to the already expanding list. I mean, I would like to see something sort of on space and place, memory and space and place, but that's partly because I've wasted a large part of my summer trying to define the term memoryscape and getting stuck in the conceptual swamp from which I haven't yet emerged. And I think also the developments in thinking about commemoration and decommemoration would also be another area that I would add, but not to replace any of the other ones that have already been suggested, and that's the problem, I think. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is very helpful. While you were talking, I was also looking at the chat, and Elizabeth Benjamin kind of said something very similar of saying, well, the concepts are actually useful for students. And maybe this is where the difference is between a handbook and a textbook to a certain extent. So it sounds as if the discussion is going a little bit into a direction we actually do need both. But I don't know if Astrid wants to comment on this or on something else.
I can basically continue and pick up on what has been said so far. I absolutely agree that we have a responsibility to keep on board the genealogy of memory studies, its key concepts, its intellectual history. So I feel that very strongly, and I think that needs to be passed on to the next generation. Very much a memory act, what you're doing here. But I also see it's a series in contemporary history, and you want, perhaps that's option one, to start from these current problem constellations and challenges. And perhaps that there's a way of elegantly doing that. You propose, for example, digitalization. Yes, and I think that should in the end talk about AI, platformization, and probably also election engineering. But it might start with 2 pages on collective memory is on media and collective memory. Digitization is just one part of media and collective memory. So you could start with showing that collective memory is based on symbolic mediation. No mediation, no collective memory. Then you could talk about remediation and other concepts that were developed, and then end up with the digital, with the stuff that is hot today. Same goes for your entry decolonization. I think it needs to go back to the insight that memory is a transnational dynamics, that has to do with colonialism and post-colonialism, all the way from post-colonial melancholia to multidirectional memory, and then say, okay, the thing which is now on the table is decolonize the world and probably memory studies as well. And the same goes for decommemoration. You could start with that at a header, and it would be a nice entry point to look at the history and the practices of commemoration. And in that way, you would integrate the key concepts and also the field's history. Thanks.
Yeah, excellent. You solved the problem, I think, to a certain extent. And it also goes back to what Geoff was saying about the genealogy, right? I mean, like, how do these fields actually develop? I think then you can very nicely bring this in and see how these new topics emerge out, of course, of something that has been there longer before, which has developed already concepts that are spreading also into other areas. I mean, people who've done research on media and memory, lots of it is also used in media studies, for example, just to give an example. So I think that I agree, you said elegantly. I think that might indeed very elegantly combine these two needs that were already identified. On my list next is Astrid Rasch.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really excited that a new textbook will be coming, because we sure need an updated textbook, and something that is written deliberately as a textbook, I think, will be very, very welcome. I'm currently developing ideas for writing a textbook myself, but with a narrower scope on post-imperial memory politics. So I thought I would share some of the ideas that I've had in that connection about how to solve some of those, like how to make a textbook that is not too heavy-handed, because you had some good questions, I thought, at the beginning there about, like, do you include assignments and topics for discussion, for classroom discussions? What I've been toying with, the idea at least, is to have a lot of that as digital resources, so that you don't have to have it in the book itself, but that you have like a whole platform around the book, which includes topics for discussion, ideas for exercises you could do. I'm also planning to have podcasts there, so that it becomes this whole little ecosystem where the book is just one part of a bigger set of resources that teachers can also then pick and choose. I'm also thinking of perhaps further developing some of the case studies there, so that it doesn't all have to be in the book, but that you can go and find specific examples there. And then I just wanted to oh, now I'm hearing myself. So I wanted to share my idea on how to. Sorry, I'm doing this because I'm listening to myself, which is distracting. So how to get out of this mnemonic Eurocentrism, and because that's really crucial for what I'm doing, obviously. And there, one of the things that I'm thinking in terms of how to decolonize memory studies is that we need to look outside of things that self-identify as memory studies. So if we look at works from outside of Europe and outside of the global north that doesn't call itself memory studies, but that is swimming in some of the same waters as we do, sharing some of the same concerns. So Geoff was just describing how a book on memory studies would be interesting also to students doing public history, but vice versa, we can be inspired by people who are working on, in my case, for instance, indigenous notions of time, even if they're not self-referring to themselves as memory studies, because let's face it, our discipline has a very Eurocentric and very global north genealogy. And depending on what you want a textbook to do, you want it to convey that genealogy, but maybe you also want to sort of push the boundaries of how we imagine ourselves as a field of study. Okay, I'll end there.
Yeah, thanks very much. No, we all have this.
I think somebody has to switch off their microphone. I got in, I think, when they kind of turned in, the echo started to come.
Maybe I will try to mute everybody for a second, and then we'll unmute ourselves. All right, let's hope this will help.
Okay. Yeah, I think this is working. Okay, great. Thanks, Katarzyna, for intervening. I think we all understood what you were saying, Astrid, even though it was a little bit difficult to listen to. And I think you made indeed a very important point that some of the literature that would actually be useful to include is not defined as memory or does not self-define as being part of the memory studies literature, and then it will be sometimes maybe also difficult to catch it. So generally speaking, I was thinking about how to deal with the fact that, of course, I don't know everything and I don't have access to everything, etc. So again, I might actually reach out to many of you asking for suggestions, for help, for ideas on what to include. And then I totally agree with you of saying, well, if we want to push the boundaries, then we indeed have to also look at those the kind of literature that indeed would not fall maybe traditionally into the memory field, but deals with very important issues here. So yeah, to basically say that I might actually get back to all of you with questions and suggestions. And at this point, I would also like to invite all of you to get into contact if you want to, to contribute. Next on my list is Pablo.
Yes, hello. Well, thank you very much for this amazing meeting. I'm from Brazil, São Paulo, a PhD student at the University of São Paulo. And regarding the emerging major topics, I believe it's important to make it very clear that discussing memory does not equal discussing the meaning making of past violence, right? I see relatively few works that question the traumatic paradigm and the reasons why we have all around the world a memory culture centered on violence. And with that, the claim for future-oriented memory studies as unprotected. So the growing interest in memory and activism, for example, and even on the non-human, as Lynn puts it, beyond the Anthropocene memory, to think of memory also beyond the question of violence and ecocide. And now, unrelated to that, if you want an approach to collective memory from Brazil, I would recommend searching for Eclair Bossi. There's this book from her. You have it mirrored, but Eclair is, I can type it on the chat if you want. She's not contemporary. This book dates from 1973, so she's prior to Pierre Knorr, for example, and she deals mostly with oral memory. She's mostly inspired by Halbach and Benjamin, but also with the importance of the roots, inspired by the French philosopher Simone Weil, and the, I don't know how to put it, I believe unrootedness of a big city such as São Paulo, the laws of memory frameworks, you know. So she's a major author for Brazilian memory studies, which is not very consolidated, but I think to anyone interested in looking at the global south, she's a good call. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot also for suggesting further readings. The book was published in Portuguese, I guess, right? If I saw the title properly. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think she has anything translated, but maybe you can find some papers on the internet, and you can maybe translate it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's an issue, I know.
No, but it's AI makes everything possible now. You're getting access to literature in other languages has never been as easy, I think, which is a possibility, but also a threat in many ways. Now, I don't know how to pronounce the name. The next one on the list, Peju?
Hello, good evening, everyone. I'm Peju. I'm from Nigeria. I happen to have worked with, I did my thesis on memory studies. I was working with local chronicles, which are indigenous production of African history, but more rudimentary because it did not conform to the normal historical text. So I was able to categorize this indigenous book as textual memory of the Yoruba people. Now, my primary memory study is during the course of my research. My colleagues and my supervisors and senior colleagues were always telling me that what is the difference between oral tradition, oral history, and memory studies? And I'm like, they don't have to be different. It's actually, one is just a continuation of the conversation of the other. So when I pick many memory study texts, I do not see books or contribution by West African scholars, whether historians, or I see works on West Africa, but usually written by people in the diaspora, not from the indigenous scholars. So I would love it if the next global text or publication on memory study text as a global approach that includes the voices of West Africa and how they approach memory studies. Thank you.
Yeah, your question is very similar to two questions I had in the chat as well, which is indeed the question how to ensure that the textbook reflects diverse cultural perspectives. How can we ensure that we bridge it between like the very specific geographical and cultural perspectives on the one hand, and then global relevance. So yeah, these are all the big challenges. And indeed, I think one way forward is what Astrid also proposed of going by examples, no? Just allowing different perspectives by looking at having this more general introduction and then looking at very specific examples that allow these different perspectives. And then being also very upfront that, I mean, this is always a selection and will always be a selection, and it's an example, right? It will never be all encompassing, but it can give an indication of how different maybe also some perspectives are. Jillian.
Hello, thank you for everything. It's been very illustrative and very interesting. I'm kind of circling back to memory studies, probably 15 years after being fairly steeped into memory studies from nationalism angle. And the last 15 years I've been working in Mexico. I work here at the Mexican University. I'm from the Netherlands, but educated in the United States. And what I see coming back to memory studies and coming back to memory studies, but really in Mexico, memory studies is coming up. So it's very interesting to sort of live this two-moment thing for me. And what I see here, and sort of contextualizing more broadly, which I think is very important for your book, is a discussion of the continuum of rural areas, practices, memories, etc., and the urban and trans-urban migrants. Of course, we can get into all of those elements. And then on top of that, or related to that, is the element also of praxis and immaterial culture. So I've been working a lot with our native carnivals and how you see how practices are a memory recipient. And my project that I'm working on for the last 10 years has been the biocultural documentation of Carnival. So the idea of biocultural and environment as being a container of memory, of course, and in a very different way, a much less rationalized way than the European way or the American way. So I think, if you want, of course, we're all coming here with great ideas and you've got a book to write of 200 pages, but I think it's very important to include the environment, not just place, but the environment and its concerns and its elements, and how the different continents have also interacted differently over time with this. So I think there's, intersecting with immaterial culture, there's sort of like a, dare I say, quick and dirty way to deal with some of this, and the multiple celebrations in the world. Of course, Latin America is not exclusive in that, but I think that's at least worth maybe the 2-page mention suggestion that Astrid discussed earlier. So thank you very much, and greetings from Chiapas, Mexico.
Yeah, thank you. You actually brought up something important, which was the fact that maybe for some regions, certain topics are important that are maybe not on the radar of, let's say, people in the Netherlands. Just to say, since you're from the Netherlands, you said, and I'm based in Maastricht, also the Netherlands. So maybe I think we have to be really careful with that list if we want to be inclusive, right? And see, okay, what has actually emerged in Europe or in North America, and what has emerged as important topics in Asia, in Africa, and Latin America. The list might look very different if we compare that. So thanks a lot for bringing that to the attention. I have Silas on the list next.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my name is Silas Udenze, and I'm from Nigeria actually, but I'm on this call from Barcelona. Well, I think my intake would be that, of course, I recently concluded my PhD at Open University of Catalonia, and my interest is on digital activism and memory. And of course, I wasn't interested in studying that initially because I don't really know what is memory study, but going through the literature, it became so important for me that I was trying to look at the movement in Nigeria. It's called the End SARS movement. It's a movement about the police brutality in Nigeria that happened in 2020. But looking at the literature, what surprised me so much was that I had to do a recollection, because currently in the country, they don't teach history no more in Nigeria. They don't teach history. History has been scrapped from the curriculum. And looking at the study, when I ventured into the study about police brutality through the lens of memory, I realized there was a lot of historical context I had to deal with. And it became so important to me because in Nigeria, I would say, I don't think there is any institution that has a course that is called cultural memory or memory studies. Nothing as such. But from an insider perspective, I would say during my thesis, I think one contribution I brought in my thesis was actually to dwell more on the aspect of what I describe as implicit collective memory. Because my data was talking more about police brutality, but there's this constant recollection and unconscious recollection of the challenges in Nigeria, issue of poverty, unemployment, youth restiveness, and the like. So the people were not really telling me about police brutality, but this constant unconsciousness about what they are going through in the country up to date. So that's the area I'm interested in at the moment, trying to develop my work on implicit collective memory. I think it is very important to also look at this area of memory study, because I think even in my work, it is not necessarily about explicit activism, like people went to the street, but there's this constant dovetailing of the unconsciousness in their agitation, especially when I was talking with them. And looking at the social media account of people I studied, people tend to implicitly create some activist practices But when you ask them, are you an activist? They tell you, no, I'm not an activist. So trying to tie these two knots together, I think areas are on implicit activism and implicit collective memory would really be a good insight. And from my own end, I'm trying to really do some work to see how I really bring up putting the voice of people from Africa or what I would call the global south, but I don't like using the word global south, or what we call the global majority in that sense, because at least from an insider perspective, it's been so so challenging, I would say, but we really need to bring our voice to the table at this moment. But my own contribution will be to look at this recollection that are implicit, that are unconscious in some ways, because I find that really well in my data. Thank you.
Sorry, I lost my mouse, so I couldn't unmute myself for a second. Yeah, thank you very much, Silas. I think that was indeed an important contribution. Implicit collective memory, I think that's a great term as well. I think a lot of those things that we observe are not necessarily conscious, right? A lot of groups act in a certain way and refer to certain narratives without realizing what is actually behind it. It's not always so explicit and also targeted as we sometimes think it is. So I think that's a very important, also subtle distinction on what to look at. So thanks a lot. Next one is Mary. No, yeah. Two? No, I think Katarzyna, you actually have been on the list for a long time, huh?
Yeah, wait a second.
Yeah, I think maybe you should go first, yeah, because I think you were actually on the list first.
I tried, and then it kind of switched me off and everything. Hello, welcome. I'm really glad to be part of this discussion, and I really like what I've heard before because it comes from so many different places. I just was wondering I'll make it very short, okay? I was wondering very much about technicality and the organization of the material, because I think it's quite a daunting task, and that would be something that I would be kind of thinking about also when I'm writing like my own things. And I was wondering if this is a textbook, and we are all like people mentioned here at different like parts of the world contributing their own take on memory studies here. I was wondering if it is possible, for example, to have like a regular text that will kind of introduce different, let's say, umbrella concept. Like, for example, Astrid Erl mentioned this kind of a pillar, memory and the media, and then how it branches out into many different, let's say, subcategories. So if it would be possible also to kind of include, for example, if we talk about a certain subject, like, for example, memory and genocide, or memory and identity, memory and, I don't know, narrative, to include certain examples. That's one thing. Like, for example, if we like right now I'm doing research on the Rwanda genocide. And for example, if we talk about museums and commemoration, we could, for example, there could be like examples included that show how different places and different nations also and cultures commemorate certain really traumatic events, and have a list like from it would take a little bit of research to see how it is all spread out. I know that, but for students just to have a kind of a direction of what they could consult, let's say under a certain topic or subject. And then I was thinking about, because this is always something that I'm looking for, is that we are talking about the very contemporary state of the art that is right now. But I find sometimes that there are obviously textbooks and articles that were groundbreaking and that they kind of broaden the field. And it would be maybe also nice to have like a box maybe on a page or something with the kind of not maybe links, but maybe like this kind of a little bit of a reference section where one might go further, with the research. So like, for example, not many of them, but let's say maybe 5 or 6, and quite technically, those that are really contributing to the field in a great way, because this is what we sometimes have. Like, we read a lot of sources, and then finally we kind of rely on 1 or 2 or 3 that are the pillars, and then we branch out into others that contribute a little bit. But maybe it would be such a textbook would also mean looking for those very valuable contributions to the field. And that was what I was thinking about when I was listening to you. So thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you. Indeed, when we were discussing this, I don't know if you were here from the beginning, but indeed the idea was a little bit to look also at examples, right?
Yeah, the case studies were mentioned. I remember that.
Yeah, exactly. And then examples, and I think like your idea of having boxes that list the groundbreaking texts, as you call them, or texts that were very influential in the field, etc. I think that would be really useful, because we always have to keep. I think like we have to distinguish between a book that we would like to have, maybe as scholars, and then a book that is useful for students. And I think they would look very different, right?
Exactly.
I think a lot of the memory scholars are okay, up to date with the background, if you so want, of the field, and they're missing everything maybe that is new, and that because there's so much being published that many of us cannot keep up. At least I cannot. I don't have the time to read everything that comes out. And I think like maybe if you ask scholars, they would say like, we would really like to have an overview of like the newest literature on this, but this is not necessarily what students need. So I think indeed having also references to maybe also the traditional texts where they can go back to and texts that were very influential, I think is really important. And I also think there has to be a very big further literature section that they can go to and say, okay, well, this is the starting point, but then I can read this and this and this if I want to know more, and also the more traditional text, right? I think that is actually really important. I was actually, while you were all talking, I was thinking like, how can I, because this is like an hour and a half of collecting feedback, but how can I make this like profit from this knowledge that is in the room? Because not all of you can speak now, and we only have 7 minutes left. Maybe there's a possibility of having some sort of public document that everybody can contribute to, and you can jot down maybe ideas or topics that you really want to see in the book, concepts that you think really have to be discussed, and that can be some sort of living document that they can then at some point of time take down and work with. I think that would actually be really useful for me, and it would allow all of you, also those of you who were not able to speak, to maybe contribute and think further. So I was just thinking that maybe that is an idea. I see some thumbs up. So maybe I'll come up with an idea on how to make this possible technically. I think most of you probably got the information of the dMSA via the MSA mailing list. So maybe I'm going to use that and make sure that maybe that document is somewhere available on the MSA website or so. I have to think about how to do this. But before we have to conclude, there's one last speaker, Mary.
Yes, hello. Thank you for accepting me, and thank you for this inspiring meeting. I'm Mariam, and I'm from Iran. I've studied urban design and urban planning. And one of the projects I'm working on is how to use narrative studies and storytelling in some cases, some places in Iran. And I was wanted to know, how can I make some appropriate connections between this memory studies? Because when I've read many texts on your website, and it's more than a year I'm following memory studies via LinkedIn or your website, and it's really interesting for me. And I think it's something that I need to join some new ideas to my projects. And according to methodology, I'm using narrative studies, which what John Creswell mentions among 5 qualitative method designs. And I wanted to know, how can I make a connection between narrative studies, storytelling, and memory studies? It's just a short question, and I will appreciate if you can explain it for me. Thank you.
That's a short question, but it would require a long answer, which probably is like going beyond the scope of the of this webinar. I suggest maybe that we have an email exchange about this. So if you want to write me an email, then I can try to answer, and that will also be a bit of a test if I manage to bridge the different disciplines, because that's also going to be one of the challenges, of course, of writing this. Going back to disciplines maybe that I'm not less familiar with than my own. Okay, I see the time, and I also don't see any further hands raised. So this is actually great timing. I would like to really thank you all, to the both roundtable speakers, Astrid and Ye-Hyun. Thank you a lot for the initial input. Thanks to everybody who raised their hand and came with great ideas and suggestions. Thanks to everybody who was listening. I will be in contact concerning the way ahead. I can maybe already tell you a little bit about what the timeline is for the textbook. So I have to have a first rough proposal in December to see what the editors are going to say about this. And then I have to hand in the full proposal by April. And then after signing the contract, it's about 2.5 to 3 years of writing this book. So not sure if that is realistic. It's a bit of a daunting exercise, very exciting, but also daunting. And I will continue to, or would like to continue to draw from your expertise, your ideas, etc. So I think this ideally should really be something that is coming from the field and not just something that comes out of my head. So I will try to make this document that everybody can contribute to as a starting point. And then try to keep you updated also about the progress. I might reach out to some of you individually as well for feedback. And yeah, and then maybe in a few years we will have a textbook on the market that is hopefully going to be useful for everybody, both teachers and students. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.